Hello and welcome to Why Wait Till Sunday, the college football DFS show. I'm your host, Alfred, and we are going to go through week 12 here, 13-game slate. And the games we will be looking at are LSU at Arkansas, UF at Vandy, Clemson at FSU, Illinois at Nebraska, Indiana at Ohio State, App State at Coastal Carolina, who is ranked, I'll have you know, Cal at Oregon State, Wisconsin at Northwestern, Cincinnati at UCF, Iowa at Penn State, Kansas State at Iowa State, Vatech at Pitt, and then Kentucky at Alabama. And so what we like to do first and foremost is go over the games with the highest totals. We want to know what are the games where the offenses are going to be very featured. And first one on the list is going to be Florida Vandy. That total is 68.5. Florida favored by 31. So their implied team total is about 50 points. But who will be scoring those touchdowns? Is it the starters? Maybe not. You've got the Clemson at Florida, or Clemson versus Florida State. That's a 65-point total with a spread of 35 points in favor of Clemson. So their team total is also about 50. So Florida and Clemson are leading the slate. Then you've got Alabama with an implied team total of 44 in their game against Kentucky with a 30-point spread. So you've got three games with 30-point spreads, which project to be total blowouts. We'll have to decide, do we want starters out of those games or what? How are we going to play these tremendous blowouts? Ohio State in a relatively closer game at 20-point spread, and their team total against Indiana is an implied total of 43. Interestingly, Nebraska comes in the fifth highest implied team total at 37. Their game total is 58 points, and they're favored by 15. Cincinnati UCF is an interesting one. The game is 62.5 total, and Cincy favored by 5.5. So their team total is about 34, whereas UCF comes in at 29. So still over 4 touchdowns, and that's the mark where I kind of, want to stop really thinking too much about a team if they're not even going to score 4 touchdowns. Arkansas against LSU. That game is a 63.5 projection, and it's a 3-point spread. So LSU projected to be about 33 versus 30 in that game, with Arkansas coming in with 30 points. Vatech is projected to be 29 points put on Pitt in their game. And then an interesting one, because the game total is low. Iowa State versus Kansas State. Iowa State's at 40, or that game is at 46.5. But with Iowa State favored by 11, it's a 29-point team total for them, which gets them over the 28-point mark. So those are the teams that are going to hopefully be scoring at least 4 touchdowns in their game. And, what can we do with those teams? Anybody else, you can certainly pick spot players to fill gaps or value plays, but you're not going to be too excited to roster players from a team that doesn't even look to score 4 touchdowns, especially when you've got teams on this slate or on any slate in college, that are in the 40s or something like that. So we'll talk about the defenses when we go through the players, and let's get right into it. What I like to do is go through, the expensive players name by name, because you're going to want to know who they are. And then as we get towards the lesser players, we'll get more discerning and kind of only highlights the value plays and good matchups and things like that. So you've got Kyle Trask, number 1 quarterback. He's 9,700, and, for all intents and purposes, he's worth it. I mean, the guy is throwing 5 touchdowns in a half. He's going absolutely bonkers. He's pacing for more touchdowns than Joe Burrow was last year through 6 games. It's, what can you say? I mean, it's just an absolute, scorched earth down in Gainesville. They're running teams out of the stadium this year, and they play Vanderbilt this week. So the question is, when Ole Miss played Vandy, they threw all game, and they were throwing up, 28, 35 points and still throwing the ball. Is Florida going to do that? I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I'd love to have, if anyone watching this has an inside line to Dan Mullen and what they're going to think about doing this week. I generally shy away from these huge blowouts taking people from the passing game. I'd rather roster a running back who can, tally up 2 or 3 touchdowns in the third quarter before they put in the backups, that kind of thing, once the game's out of hand. But it is not out of the realm of possibility Trask puts up another 6 touchdowns. They may be trying to get him the Heisman Trophy. He's now being mentioned in that conversation. And so, we really can't know the motivation. I'll tell you this, Florida will not need to throw the ball after the second quarter in this game. And so for DFS purposes, I'm going to bet on the fact they may be running and not really, keeping the pedal to the floor against Vandy. Trevor Lawrence comes in at 9,400. He's always, pretty much worth it. Their matchup is beautiful against Florida State. I mean, that may be worse than Vanderbilt. Florida State's defense is bottom of the barrel on the slate. They're giving up 6.6 yards per play. They're bottom 4 in total yards given up per play. Kind of middle of the road in terms of volume for whatever reason. They're not giving up a ton of passing attempts or a ton of rushing attempts. And then a rate per pass attempt, per rush attempt, they're kind of, bad middle of the slate. So certainly not an imposing defense whatsoever. And it's Clemson, so they can run through anybody they want. Again, with an implied team total of 50 points and a 35-point spread, we have certainly seen Clemson, kind of throttle back in the third quarter. DJ, you can get in the game at quarterback. We've seen at ETN, have 13 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown and then get pulled. So it's hard to roster these guys where you need 3 touchdowns in a college slate to make value. And, if they don't get them all in the first or second quarter, if there's no defensive touchdowns, if there's no special teams touchdowns that take the ball out of the offensive hands, you just kind of need it to be perfect because these guys aren't going to play the whole game. And, they're just, the teams are, these teams, especially now, they have their eyes set on the national championship playoff. They're not going to be giving ETN 25 touches against FSU. So when it's, we're talking about Trevor Lawrence, though, it's the same idea. And I think that I probably won't be playing him at that price because I think we can have a similar upside for a less salary. We got Desmond Ridder for 9,200. This guy has been an absolute beast for Cincinnati, and he's one of these quarterbacks where the entire offense runs through him. He's their best running back. He's their quarterback. He has a good arm. He's certainly competent as a passer. Not really sure if he's like an elite passer, but in college, it doesn't really matter. And against UCF, I'm not that worried about it. This defense allows 33 pass attempts per game. They're kind of low middle on yards per attempt allowed. They allow 44 rushes per game, which is third highest on this slate. They allow 4.3 yards per rush. So this defense for UCF is not imposing. And the offense is good. Even against Cincinnati, who has a good defense, UCF is going to score. Cincinnati is going to need to score. But we've seen him do it against teams with decent offenses like SMU and Memphis and Houston, where Cincinnati has actually blown them out because Cincy's defense is pretty darn good. But in these games where, they do have a threat on the other side of the field, Cincy has really scored a lot of points, and it all goes through Ridder. I mean, multiple touchdowns on the ground, 2 or 3 in the air. I mean, 4 touchdowns is well in play for this guy. At 9,200, he's certainly not cheap, but he's not the most expensive player. And, if you're telling me I got to roster Trask, Law, or Ridder, I'd say Ridder and take a little savings there if I had to pick one of those 3, because his upside is the same as Law and Trask and Lawrence and Trask, in my opinion. So you got Hendon Hooker. He's a guy, I've played a little tiny bit of him, but not too much this year. He just is almost a zero in the passing game, which is interesting. He's really a glorified running back. Certainly has gone for 3 touchdowns multiple games on the ground, and that will carry you in fantasy. But I just, I like the quarterbacks. I want dual threat. He's actually not even a dual threat because he's barely throwing, not 20 attempts a game. We got Justin Fields at 9,000. So he's less than Desmond Ridder. He's less than Hendon Hooker. It's kind of wild. He is playing at an absolutely ridiculously elite level right now, completing 86% of his passes, which is absolutely unheard of. Not only that, 10.9 yards per attempt. He's averaging over 300 yards per game. He's not a true dual threat. Yes, he can run, but he's averaging like 2 yards a carry. He wasn't super, at least volume based in his running last year. He can do it when needed, but he's not just a guy who's going to rush it 15 to 20 times a game like some of these other quarterbacks in their college game. Now, he can certainly give you a 300-yard passing game, no problem, and probably will this week against Indiana, but they're scheduled to score 44 points or so. I have no problem with Fields, but again, it's interesting that he's only 9,000, but also there's guys under him who I think can put up similar numbers. And one of those is Dylan Gabriel for 8,700. Now he plays Cincy, who we just talked about, their quarterback. That defense is absolutely disgusting. They are crushing people. Like I said, they held Memphis to like 10 points. SMU that can put up a ton of points didn't score on them. They're one of the stingiest defenses on the entire slate from a yards per play. Actually, the lowest yards per play at only 4.2, tied with Iowa. Cincinnati defense is world class and certainly is American Athletic class, meaning, the best in their conference. So probably don't love Dylan Gabriel, even though he's a good player and that offense is very fun at 8,700. I'm not sure I want the quarterback. I could definitely take 1 or 2 UCF receivers that we'll talk about potentially. I think the overall upside there is difficult to imagine against Cincinnati just because they've already shut down some other high-flying offenses. Mac Jones sits at 8,500. Same principle with the blowout situation for Bama versus Kentucky. Yes, he may throw 4 touchdowns. He may throw 2 and they get a defensive and special teams and Najee Harris runs it in 3 times or, some other backups or something like that. So I generally want games where you're going to have to go back and forth. You're going to have these guys keeping their foot on the gas in the fourth quarter. I don't like hoping for all these scoring needing to happen in the first 2 or 3 quarters. It's just not really my style. I think it limits your upside a little bit because everything has to go perfect. You can't have a short field. You can't have, these other guys when you need them to go and score 300 yards. I mean, Mac Jones may have 225 yards and 4 touchdowns because they're already always playing inside the 50-yard line or whatever. So, don't love him, although 8,500 is getting more approachable in cost. Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. They are ranked this year, and he is looks like a redshirt freshman having quite the season for the Chanticleers. He is completing almost 70% of his passes. He has 16 touchdowns in 6 games to only 1 interception. He has also rushed for 271 yards on the ground with 4 touchdowns. So he's, got that dual threat in him, and certainly an interesting player at 8,000. But the issue for me, honestly, in this game, because I always like when some unusual teams are playing and we get to play these players in DraftKings, but that game only has a 47 total with Coastal Carolina coming in at 26 total points. It's not a total stay away, but at 8,000, I'd like to see a little bit higher upside. And that is what brings us to Luke McCaffrey. Yes, it's Christian McCaffrey's brother. He plays quarterback for Nebraska, newly minted starter, and got his first W last week against Penn State. So he will presumably be starting again in place of the benched Adrian Martinez, who had the same kind of upside and just made too many mistakes and couldn't get it done. So we've got McCaffrey here. Obviously, he's a great athlete, knowing the family that he's a part of. So what you can expect from him is a little bit of that Konami code. He has actually been playing, even when Adrian Martinez was technically the starter, he was getting almost 10 rushes a game. Against Ohio State, he had 9 carries for 80 yards. He even caught a pass. He had 8 rushes against Northwestern. And then in his first game as a starter, he threw 21 passes for 150 yards, threw a touchdown, ran for a touchdown, and put down 67 yards on the ground. Okay, nothing too dramatic there. He's a risk to not get you the bonus. To not get 300 through the air, probably won't. He could get 100 on the ground, I think, in this matchup. But you've got Nebraska going against one of the very worst defenses on the slate in the Illinois Fighting Illini. They are giving up the 2nd most yards per pass attempt, the 5th most rushing attempts per game. They are giving up the 3rd most yards per play. This Illinois defense stinks, and Luke McCaffrey is a dynamic player. He's going to get yardage on all phases of the game, and I think for 6,900, this guy's got 3 touchdowns in him, very much against Illinois, and very excited to play him at 6,900. I'm definitely going to do that. And we will talk about some other Cornhuskers, but really like Luke McCaffrey. Not really sure what his level of, rostership is going to be. He was interesting last week. He already was named the starter. He's got 1 game under his belt, but he wasn't, fantastic. He was okay. So we might be able to get him at a little bit of a roster, discount there. We'll see, but the matchup is great. I'm definitely going to play McCaffrey and stack him with a guy we'll talk about in a minute. Then finally, the most bargain basement that I can go and feel comfortable is Felipe Franks at 6,200, and this is just because of the matchup. He is not getting to 40 attempts in any one game. He has only thrown for 300 yards 1 time. I am a Gator fan and watched him play for us for about 3 years, and he just doesn't have it. I mean, that's the best way I can tell you. He's got physical attributes. He just doesn't have quarterbackiness. I mean, he doesn't have it. However, Arkansas is facing LSU, who is actually the worst defense on the slate, which is pretty surprising from a yards per play basis. They are giving up 7.2. They're giving up the most yards per attempt on the slate. I will probably roster some Felipe Franks at 6,200. I mean, the cost is just, if he's going to go for 300 yards, this is the game he's going to go against. This LSU defense is terrible, and the LSU offense can put up points. So again, it's one of these games that could be going back and forth. And, Arkansas is putting together a interesting little season here. I think they're better than people thought. They haven't gotten quite as many wins as you want to see, but I don't love it. It's kind of hold your nose, but it's 6,200. I think 300 yards and 3 touchdowns is very much in play for Franks. And we'll talk about one of his receivers when we get to when we get to those guys. Now we're going to go into running backs. Breece Hall at 9,900. He's a total stud. He's going to get 25 plus carries. He's going to catch the ball 2 or 3 times. He's the total engine of the ISU offense. I don't have a problem paying up for these guys who are just tremendous volume running backs. It's hard to find that in college. The matchup is not too imposing. They're favored by 11. They've got a team total of 29. So, 2 touchdowns is probably reasonable. Kansas State allows a decent amount of volume, both passing attempts, rushing attempts. Their rate stats are kind of middle of the road. But I'm not afraid of Kansas State. I mean, Breece Hall is just one of these guys. Like, he's a great player, and I'm not really worried too much about the matchup. If anything, the game could be competitive enough to where he's still running the ball well, to close out the game. 9,900 is tough because you need like 150 and 2 touchdowns. But if anybody can do it, it's certainly Breece Hall. That offense is definitely running completely through him. I think in some, I run a decent amount of lineups out there. I think you're going to have some Breece Hall. You just don't want to miss out because he can certainly go for 4 touchdowns. But, and there's not a lot of other running backs that I love this week. So I may just try to make it work. There's also not a lot of the high priced receivers that I love either. So, I think we can fit him in there. It'll be interesting once we kind of actually get into the lineup builds later this week. But certainly Breece Hall has got to be on your radar. He's a great player, and he's, a stud workhorse. Najee Harris, 9,300, same idea. He's being a workhorse this year for Bama. One of these blowout games, but I'd rather roster Harris than Mac Jones. I think Harris 3 touchdowns absolutely in play, before halftime. But I've found success. Like, you don't have to have him. I mean, if he goes for 5 touchdowns, yeah, you've got to have him. But if he goes for 87 yards, maybe 25, on a couple of receptions and gets in the end zone twice at 9,300, you don't have to have him. And, I think that's more likely than 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, just because they're going to use Brian Robinson. They've got depth for days. And, Harris is definitely the starter. I don't see them really pushing it with these guys in a game against Kentucky. Jamar Jefferson is 8,900. This is a guy I'd rather pay for Jamar Jefferson 8,900 against Cal, who is not a very imposing defense at all. Allowed 54 rushing attempts to UCLA last week. We only have 1 game under our belt, but I mean, UCLA ran all over them. So, you save $400 from Najee Harris, and you get Jamar Jefferson, who's going to get 25 carries as well. And in a game that might be more competitive. So I think Jefferson's going to have similar volume. I think he's as good of a bet to go for 150 yards. So I'd take the savings there. I think Jamar Jefferson's a real interesting player. Probably won't be too popular just because he's a little bit kind of unknown relative to Breece Hall, Najee Harris. And the next guy, Travis Etienne, who everybody knows, he's dynamic, he's amazing, he might get 12 touches. So I'm out on him for 8,600. I'm a volume guy, and I don't want to hope for, 2 or 3 75-yard runs to make my value. Master Teague at 8,000, he's splitting time. I don't want Master Teague for 8,000. For Ohio State, Goodson for Iowa. He's only had 20 carries once. He had a huge game last week, so his price is up to 7,500. I'm not going to pay for his breakout game. I think he had 3 touchdowns last week, but the matchup this week is Penn State, who's having a lot of trouble on both sides of the ball. But I think that game's got a low total. I'm not in on Goodson this year. Then we got CJ. I guess it's CJ Marable. Maybe it's not Marable, but he plays for Coastal Carolina. He's an interesting player because he's a volume play. 20 touches, I think, is in play. 3 to 4 receptions included in that. At 7,300, you can count on him being the kind of the engine of that backfield, I think, for 7,300. So we're finding guys you don't have to pay that super premium, but you're going to get the volume that you want. That 20 touch barrier. And when you can throw in 2 or 3 receptions or 3 or 4 receptions in PPR, that becomes very much in play. So he's certainly interesting, but that game is just not slated to score a ton of points. Chris Brown, not that Chris Brown, Christopher Brown Jr., I think is how he's listed for Cal. He's kind of their workhorse. He had 230 touches last year and comes in this year. Again, he's going to be featured. He's 6,300, and Oregon State has a terrible run defense. In their 2 games they've played this year, they are allowing the most yards per attempt, 6.1, on the season. They haven't really given it up too much through the air. Certainly would be considered a run funnel defense. And it's only been a couple of games, but they've allowed 40 rushing attempts and 6.1 yards per attempt. I will be rostering some Christopher Brown at 6,300. He can catch some passes for you in PPR. Every single one of those matters. And then, there's some savings there. So it really depends on what the roster construction is going to look like. But I do think it's a week to probably pay up for running back. And I'll have to play around with it as we go forward. Then we got Mills for Nebraska. He's the running back. He's kind of banged up. I think he's listed as questionable. If he's a full go at 6,200, he's interesting, although they have a bit of a murky backfield. And I think we're going to talk about a different guy I'd rather roster. We have Dameon Pierce for Florida at 5,300. He's come on a little bit lately and is approaching 15 carries in the last couple of games. May catch a pass or two, but you're only paying 5,300, so you're not going to get that locked in 20 touches. But against Vanderbilt, he could get to 20 touches. They're going to be comfortable running the ball a lot in the second half, I would imagine. And Pierce is certainly their number one. Malik Davis is definitely the B-back, and then you've got Naquan Wright, who's mixing in. But Dameon Pierce, I would imagine, is going to be kind of their, guy. I could see him getting like 6 to 7 carries a drive in the second half. He's certainly interesting for 5,300 given that matchup against Vandy. I will be dabbling in some Dameon Pierce. John Emery Jr. at 5,100 against Arkansas. They are bad against the run, and their backfield at LSU is certainly unsettled, but he has a game or two where he's hit 15 plus carries. The last game they played, he had 8, and Davis Price only had, I think, 5 carries. He could be emerging. I think he's the best talent in that backfield. It's probably a tournament only play for John Emery because I don't think you can bank on the touches for him. But Arkansas's rush defense, they're giving up a ton of plays, both through the air, but definitely on the ground. They're giving up the 3rd or 4th most rushing attempts per game. And so I think the LSU backfield is interesting. I would put my money on Emery if it's going to be anybody. And I think he's a tournament play at 5,100 with a reasonable upside if he gets 15 plus touches. And finally, you have Epstein from Illinois. He's kind of their feature running back. They're probably going to get their quarterback, Peters, playing in this game. And so they may do a more traditional offense because the guy who was filling in was a major dual threat. But Peters is going to be more of a typical quarterback. And so they may give the ball to Epstein a little bit more this week. And, Nebraska does not have that impressive of a defense. They are giving up 46 rushes on the ground per game. So teams are certainly happy to run the ball on them. So I think he's real interesting. If we can confirm during the week that the quarterback will be Peters, I think Epstein at 4,400 is certainly a play. I think you can expect 15 touches out of him in that game. And last time they were in a decent matchup against Rutgers, he did score a touchdown. So, I wouldn't expect the world. I wouldn't expect 100 yards, but maybe 60 and a touch. So like 12 points at 4,400 if you have to have the savings because you're trying to cram in all these other expensive guys. I mean, he's an interesting punt play at running back. All right, on to the receivers, and then we're going to have to get out of here. Leading the slate is Devonta Smith. We've talked about Bama. I mean, it's nothing to do with his ability as a player. I'm just not sure I want to pay the most expensive price for a guy who just might not need to be used for 4 quarters. Marlon Williams for UCF is 8,300. I think this guy's got a 5 reception floor. Greater than 10 receptions is definitely in play. At 8,300 against Cincinnati, I'm a little concerned. I mean, the volume is going to be there. He's going to catch passes. He's the number 1 receiver for UCF. They throw a ton. I think there's a guy later for less that I'd be happy to play off UCF and get a piece of that passing game without having to pay the premium on Marlon Williams in an objectively difficult matchup. Garrett Wilson is 7,900 for Ohio State. Chris Olave, they're kind of 1 and 2 for the Buckeyes, 7,900 and 7,600. That's tough. Ohio State's got this team total of 43. They're playing Indiana, which I think will be a competitive game despite the spread of 20 points. But Indiana's been good. Now, can Justin Fields and company certainly exploit them? Yes, but Indiana has not been a pushover. They've been pretty decent. And on a rate basis, they are very tough. Only 6.3 yards per attempt, only 3.5 yards per attempt on the ground. And it was Michigan State, not Ohio State last week, but they ground up Michigan State's offense and spit them out onto the floor. I mean, they shut them out. They couldn't do anything. I watched that game because I rostered Michigan State's cheap quarterback, and that turned out to be a humongous mistake. I mean, they were just awful. Of course, Ohio State's a different breed altogether, but I'm not sure I want to pay the premium against this team. We probably don't quite know how good Indiana just is. They're playing with a lot of vigor out there. And so, yeah, I think I'd rather a looser game. If I'm going to pay that premium, I want a game that's going to be a little bit looser. I think the Ohio State Indiana is not going to be a wide open shootout. Kadarius Toney at 7,400 for Florida. I mean, he's been great. He's probably going to catch 5 passes. He's probably going to get 2 jet sweeps or something like that. He definitely can get in the zone 3 times. I think I'd rather pay for some running backs if I'm going to pay. We're going to need savings somewhere on this slate. And so we're now down at wide receiver 5 or 6. I'm still not super excited about playing these guys. Amari Rodgers at 7,300. He's only hit 100 yards 1 time this year. Ferguson for Wisconsin is their tight end. He's 7,200. I'm not paying 7,200 for a tight end unless his name is Kyle Pitts. Jahan Dotson, 7,100 for Penn State. Finally, his price has dropped after a bad game, but against Iowa, I'm not playing. I don't want to play any Penn State players against Iowa. Oh boy, here we go. So Terrence Marshall, 7,000. Now this is very interesting. This is a guy who has blown up this year. He scored 2 touchdowns every single game until their last game before they got COVID postponed. And he had a bad game. And now he's set, but it was a understandably difficult matchup against Auburn. Now he's down to only $7,000. And he's playing Archie, who is not great. Arkansas is allowing 37 passing attempts per game. That is 4th on the slate. A pretty stingy 6.6 yards per attempt, but they're just allowing a lot of plays to be run against them. I like that. I think the value is here. This $7,000 range has been real nice for us. We've hit Tylan Wallace at 7,000, and he went totally bonkers. There was a week before Tylan Wallace, we hit another guy right around 7. I think it was Seth Williams, maybe right around 7,000. And he had 2 touchdowns. These elite players seem to have a bad game or two, and they'll drop right around to that $7,000 range. And then we can target them on a better spot, and they can really come through for us. So I think Terrence Marshall at 7,000 might be a bit of a slam dunk in a game that is over 60 point total. And could be a back and forth game. I think that is a very nice play, and he could definitely be, my number 1 receiver in a lot of lineups. Then we got Hiley for Coastal Carolina. We talked about their quarterback McCall, but this guy is pretty much a lock for 5 receptions. He's the clear alpha for them. In a game that doesn't have a high team total, but at 6,700, the price is pretty nice on this guy. He'll probably be fairly, unrostered, and he's interesting. I think I might have some if that 6,700 fits. We might have to drop even cheaper though, and there are some guys I like maybe better, but he's a volume play at 6,700 because, a guy you can kind of bank on 5 receptions is really nice. And definitely the number one in his own offense. And to get that for under 7,000 is a good play. Then you got Jalen Robinson for UCF. So this is the guy I was talking about. He's definitely the 2 in that offense, but he's a big play receiver. They'll throw it to him deep down the field, and you're getting about 2,000 in savings off of Marlon Williams at 8,300. I think he's a nice pivot, and he's a value play in a week where you're gonna need some value because you're either gonna want to play some of these high-priced quarterbacks or you're gonna want Breece Hall. I think Jalen Robinson, you can get a piece of that UCF offense. Again, I don't mind fading that either, though, because Cincy has shut down some otherwise good offenses, and it may be best just to not even touch Cincinnati, that matchup. Treylon Burks at 6,100 against that LSU defense is smash. He's way in play to go over 100 yards, multiple touchdown upside for him. He's the alpha at Arkansas. Frank's Burks stack at a fairly cheap number is really music to my ears. I'm going to have a lot of Treylon Burks this week, and he may go a little bit overlooked. I don't think he's quite a household name yet. I think there are some people that still may not realize he's the best receiver on Arkansas. I love Treylon Burks. He returns punts at 6'3", 225 pounds. He's just a dynamic guy. He's going to get some end arounds. He's going to get some rushes. 6,100. I really like Burks, especially given the matchup. John Mechie's at 5,900 with Jalen Waddle out. This is a guy definitely could be interested in rostering at 5,900 instead of Devonta Smith at 8,800. Cornell Powell at 5,800 for Clemson. I wish he was a little bit less, but these lesser guys for Clemson in this matchup, they could definitely throw. I don't know what quarterback's going to do it, but they could throw 5-6 touchdown passes. So someone cheap from Clemson is probably going to be a good play. It's hard to know who that will be. Malik Williams for Appalachian State at 5,600. He's their leading receiver. Their other kind of 1A, 1B is Hennigan, who is a little bit banged up. He's questionable for this game. If you get word that Hennigan's not going to play on Saturday morning, I'd slide Malik Williams in there because he'd be the de facto number 1. At 5,600, I think that's a decent play. Wan'Dale Robinson, 5,200. This is probably your smash of the week. He's listed as a wide receiver. He is a multi-dimensional running back wide receiver hybrid. He got 16 carries last week when Dedrick Mills, I think, was a little bit banged up. He's going to have 3 to 5 receptions for sure. And, he's an all-around playmaker, and this is a game that is probably going to go off against Illinois. At 5,200, I'm all in on Wan'Dale Robinson. If you tell me he's going to get 10 carries and 4 receptions for 5,200, yeah, that's no problem. Obviously, you need to hope he gets in the end zone, but that's the same with all these guys. Really promising. Got 16 carries last week. I mean, even if Mills is back, I think you can expect 7 to 10 carries. And then, the receptions. And at that price point, that's hard to beat. Basically you're getting a guy who's a key feature of an offense at 5,200. So I think that's great. Keon Zipperer for 4,600. This is the Florida tight end who's basically, I think, next in line for receptions now that Kyle Pitts is out. And he had 2 touchdowns last week, only 3 receptions. But it's going to be a blowout. And at 4,600, he's interesting because he's going to be playing with the starters, but he also may be in, through the game, catching passes later if the backups are in or something like that. So, I think it's a guy who is currently running with starters, but also would be in if the second team's in, third team's in, still, playing the game. So at 4,600, I'm certainly interested in him. Florida's going to feature the tight end as they have been. We got a guy from a couple weeks ago we're going to be interested in playing again. Emmanuel Bebe from Illinois. Playing Nebraska, who's not an imposing defense. We already talked about how their running defense was really bad. And against in the air, they are, giving up 8 yards per attempt. That's not very imposing. and Illinois probably going to have to throw, at least as they're trailing later on in the game. He's only 4,400. Last time we played him, he did come through with like a 50-yard catch in the second half for a touchdown that kind of saved the day. But especially if Brandon Peters is playing, that offense changes for Illinois. And I think I like their pass catchers even better than the guys they've been running out who are basically, just running around and carrying the ball 20 times. But Peters is going to throw the ball, and he's a better pure quarterback. So I kind of like that, especially if we get word Peters is playing. Also, Hightower, I think, is 4,100. I'm partial to Imado Bebe because of the name, which is cool to say. And then also just he was their alpha last year, and I think he's probably going to be their number one in a game that we need all the volume. And finally, you've got Galloway for Clemson. He's averaged 4 receptions over the last 3 games. Frank Ladson is out. And he's only 3,900. Now, this is a principle I did not apply a couple weeks ago when Clemson was going to blow someone out. And I think it was DJU's first game. And at that point, Powell was in the 3,000 range. And he had been catching passes, running with the starters. And he was like 10 catches for 100+ yards. Super smash play that was, you could see it coming, and I just kind of missed it. So Galloway is now that going to be that guy this week for me at only 3,900 in a blowout. He's going to probably be playing even if the starters get pulled, and he's averaging 4 receptions with Ladson out. So yeah, I think he's an interesting $3,900 punt play at wide receiver if you need the cash somewhere else. So he's my favorite guy under 4,000. I will be tweeting out stuff as I learn. This is the first look. It is meant to be as exhaustive as you can be, but we're going to learn more stuff as injury reports come out. We're going to learn more stuff on Thursday and Friday and even Saturday morning. So follow me on Twitter at AL_FF_RED. We're doing fleets these days. We're giving, smash plays. We did pretty well tonight for Maction Wednesday. We're having a lot of fun. Why wait till Sunday? Throw lineups every night of the week. There's college football going, but the big one is Saturday, and we're going to do it again this week. Until next time, I'll talk to you in those Twitter streets.